The warden's question just hung there in the air, thick with accusation, a palpable weight in the sterile, over-conditioned atmosphere of his expansive office. Inmates are refusing to talk, and your COs are calling it psychological warfare. I need to know what happened. His voice was a low baritone, accustomed to instant obedience, but now it was laced with a thread of something else, something bordering on exasperated curiosity. My name is James. I'm 41 years old. I stood there, ramrod straight, in front of the warden's polished mahogany desk, a vast expanse of wood that seemed to absorb all the sound in the room, creating a dead silence that was a universe away from the cacophony of metal on metal, of shouts and threats, the chaos I had just meticulously and deliberately unleashed upon C-Block. But to understand my answer, to give him the explanation he demanded, you have to understand the intricate, venomous game that had been playing out in the concrete guts of C-Block for the last 3 agonizing months. This wasn't a primitive game of shivs fashioned from toothbrushes and shakedowns for commissary snacks. Not yet, anyway, though the potential for that was always simmering just below the surface, a beast waiting for the right moment to awaken. No, this was quieter, deeper, a chess match played with perception and sanity, and a hell of a lot more dangerous than any simple act of physical violence. It was a war for the mind, a systematic dismantling of a person's will, and I just set off a bomb of pure psychological devastation right in the middle of it, a bomb whose fallout was now this suffocating silence in the warden's office. Before I tell you the secret I've kept locked away for all these years, the full, unvarnished truth of my reaction, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel, hit that like button to show you're with me, and drop a comment down below guessing what you think the final, unexpected twist of this whole affair really is. Alright, where were we? I was stationed at a prison that was so much more than just towering concrete walls and rusting iron bars. It was a battlefield of wills, a pressure cooker of human desperation and dominance. The inmates mocked me from the moment I first walked the tier, their jeers and insults echoing down the cold steel corridors, each word a carefully aimed dart designed to test every last nerve I had, to find a crack in my armor. They called me a new Jack, a rookie officer fresh out of the academy, and they could smell my inexperience on me like blood in the water, a scent that drew the sharks in. I was young, or at least I felt young then, filled with a rigid determination and the academy-drilled belief that order came from strength alone, from a loud voice and an unwavering posture. But the deeper I got into the prison's ecosystem, the more I was forced to see the truth. The real fights weren't the ones that ended with incident reports and trips to the infirmary. They were the silent, insidious psychological games, the deeply personal emotional battles that raged just beneath the surface of the daily routine. This wasn't about who was stronger in a physical sense. It was about who was smarter, who could manipulate the intricate social fabric of the block to their advantage. The warden, a man whose very presence screamed respect, but whose eyes held the secrets of 1,000 inmate confessions and 100 broken officers, once pulled me aside after a particularly tense run-in on the yard. The prisoners, led by their usual instigators, had pushed me right to the absolute edge with their taunts, a relentless barrage of filth aimed at everything from my uniform to my family. I had felt the heat rise in my neck, the familiar surge of adrenaline that screamed for a physical response. But I didn't give it to them. Instead, I reacted with a calculated, almost unnerving calm that seemed to freak them out more than any violent outburst ever could have. That single moment, that choice to meet their fire with ice, was the true start of a complicated, high-stakes dance between me, the inmates who saw me as prey, and the warden himself, who saw everything. The day they mocked the American officer wasn't just another day of insults. It was the day the music stopped, the day the whole damn thing was about to shatter into a million pieces. It never starts with a bang. It never begins with a full-blown riot or a shank in the ribs. It starts with a whisper. A quiet, almost casual comment, timed just right and spoken just loud enough for me to hear as I walked past a cell on my rounds. Look at him, fresh off the street. Thinks his shiny badge means something in here. It was a seed of disrespect, meant to chip away at the foundation of my confidence, to make me question my own authority before I even had a chance to establish it. At first, I followed the training manual to the absolute letter. Stay professional, maintain a neutral expression, show no emotion, and above all, never, ever let them see you sweat. But in C-Block, the taunts were more than just schoolyard insults. They were an art form, a collaborative effort refined over years of practice. The block was unofficially, but completely, run by a man named Marcus Silas Kane. He wasn't the biggest guy, not by a long shot, but he was a master manipulator, a quiet shot caller who pulled all the strings from the shadows of his single-man cell. Silas had been inside for a decade, and he understood the prison ecosystem better than the architects who designed the place. He knew that real power wasn't about brute muscle or the ability to win a fistfight. It was about information, perception, and the meticulous control of the social environment. A prison's social ladder is a complex, sticky spiderweb, and Silas was the spider at its very center. He decided who got respect, who got protection, and who became a target for the block's predators. And from my very first day, for reasons I didn't yet understand, he decided I was a target. His main mouthpiece, his bulldog on a leash, was an inmate named Hector, a loudmouth with a gravelly voice doing 5 years for armed robbery. Hector was what you'd call a cell warrior, all talk and bravado when he was safely behind the locked door of his cell. He was Silas's blunt instrument, constantly testing the fences, barking at the guards to see which ones would flinch, which ones could be broken. "Hey, Officer America!" he'd yell at the top of his lungs during the morning count, his voice bouncing off the concrete and steel. "How's that freedom taste from out there? Smells like fear from in here." And right on cue, the other inmates loyal to Silas would let out this low, rumbling chuckle, a synchronized sound of solidarity and contempt. It was all a performance, a carefully orchestrated show of Silas's control over his domain. They were relentlessly testing my boundaries, probing for any sign of weakness, trying to see if I could be broken down over time through sheer attrition. Every single day was a new test, a new pop quiz on my composure. They watched how I walked, analyzing my gait for any hint of hesitation. They listened to how I talked, dissecting my tone for signs of fear or anger. They noted who I was friendly with among the other officers, looking for potential divisions to exploit. They were sizing me up, plain and simple, like wolves studying a new buck in their territory, looking for that one subtle weakness they could exploit to bring me down. I tried to ignore it, to build a wall inside my head. I focused on my duties with obsessive precision, the endless cell counts, sliding meal trays through the bean slots, the invasive pat-downs, the monotonous, soul-crushing routine that is a correctional officer's life. But the mockery was relentless, a constant background noise to my existence, and then it started to change. It got personal. One sweltering afternoon, I was supervising the yard, the sun beating down on the asphalt. I kept my distance from the clusters of inmates, scanning the crowd with a hyper-vigilant habit that had become second nature. My eyes found Silas, who was watching me from across the yard, a smug, knowing look on his face as if he was the director of this play. Then, as if on a signal, Hector and his crew of sycophants wandered over, creating a casual semicircle around me. "Heard you got a girl on the outside, Officer America," Hector said, his voice dripping with a fake, cloying sympathy that was more insulting than any shout. "Better hope she ain't got a Sancho, keeping her company while you're in here playing cops and robbers with us big boys." Sancho is prison slang for the man an inmate's wife or girlfriend is with while he's on the inside. It was a classic low blow, a gut punch designed to hit a universal nerve and make me feel powerless, to remind me that while I was guarding them, my own life was unguarded. My jaw tightened so hard I felt a pop. I could feel every single eye in that yard on me, 100 pairs of them, waiting, hungry for a reaction. An outburst, a shove, any loss of control meant I'd lost the game. But ignoring it, walking away, would be interpreted as weakness, an invitation for more. I met Hector's sneering gaze, forcing my face into a mask of pure indifference. "Is that all, Hector?" I asked, my voice totally flat, devoid of any emotion. "Get back to your reps. You're getting soft." He sneered but, surprised by the lack of a satisfying reaction, he backed off, muttering insults to his crew. It was a small win, a momentary reprieve, but it felt hollow. The whispers followed me back inside, more insidious than the shouts. They knew they'd found a sore spot. The taunts about my personal life got more frequent, more specific, more detailed. How could they know this stuff? Were they just making lucky guesses, or was something else, something far more sinister, going on? The job was already taking a tremendous toll. Research I'd read during training, but never truly understood until now, shows that corrections officers face immense, unrelenting psychological stress, with rates of PTSD, depression, and suicide that can be higher than those of military veterans returning from combat. The feeling of being caught between two hostile worlds, belonging to neither, was completely and utterly overwhelming. I remember reminding myself that the prisoners weren't just monolithic bad guys. They were men with their own stories, their own tragedies. One of them was a kid named Rico, barely in his early 20s, doing a short bid for a drug charge. Unlike Hector and the others, Rico was quiet. He never joined in the taunts. He just watched, a silent observer, and sometimes I saw a familiar, deep-seated sadness in his eyes. I had read his file. His father was a lifer in another state prison. Rico was caught in the generational cycle of incarceration, and his quiet defiance, his refusal to be part of the pack, reminded me of a painful chapter in my own past. My dad wasn't in prison, but his financial betrayal of our family years ago had felt like a life sentence for all of us, a different kind of cage. The warden, a man named Thompson, ran the prison with what appeared to be an iron fist, but you always got the feeling he knew far more than he let on. He was aware of the power games, the underground economies, and how contraband and information moved in hidden notes called kites. He seemed to let the games play out, to a point, as long as they didn't boil over into overt violence that would bring outside attention. The tension just kept building, day by day, layer by layer. The open mockery turned into a silent, coordinated challenge. It wasn't just Hector anymore. The entire block would go dead silent the moment I walked the tier. Then there would be synchronized coughing from dozens of cells at once, a symphony of tapping on the bars, a whole coded language of orchestrated disrespect. They were trying to isolate me completely, to make me feel like I was the one in a cage, surrounded by 100 keepers. It's a classic psychological tactic. Turn an officer into an island, make them feel utterly alone and profoundly vulnerable, and wait for them to break. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Mail call. For inmates, it's their holiest ritual, their only tangible link to the outside world, a source of joy, pain, and everything in between. For me, it was the day the Cold War turned brutally hot. I was handing out letters, the familiar routine of sliding envelopes under cell doors. When I got to Silas's cell, he was standing at the bars, not sitting on his bunk like the others. He was waiting for me. He took the letter, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You know, James," he said, using my first name. That seemingly casual move was a total violation of protocol, a deliberate step over the unwritten line that separates guard from prisoner. Inmates dig for personal information, any scrap they can find, to build a false sense of intimacy they can weaponize later. Family is a funny thing. You think you can count on them, but sometimes, they're the ones who sell you out for a buck. He tapped the letter, a thin business envelope, against the steel bars with a rhythmic tap, tap, tap. I recognized the return address instantly. It was from my estranged uncle, the one who worked as a regional supplier for the state's prison commissary system. A cold dread, colder than the concrete floor, washed over me. How did Silas know about him? How in God's name did he know about the bad blood in my family, a story I hadn't shared with a single soul inside these walls? Silas smiled, a slow, predatory grin that didn't touch his eyes. "Tell your uncle I said hi. And thanks for the tip about your girl. Seems she's not as lonely as you think." It hit me like a physical punch to the gut. This wasn't a guess. This was confirmed information. My uncle, the man who'd betrayed my father in a business deal that ruined him years ago, a man I hadn't spoken to in a decade, was feeding information, my personal information, to a master manipulator inmate. For what? A piece of the action on the inside. A cut of the contraband trade. The betrayal reached out from my distant past and grabbed me by the throat right there on the tier. The mockery, the taunts, the whispers, it wasn't a game anymore. It was a targeted, well-researched campaign, fueled by a traitor in my own family. I just stood there, completely frozen, the remaining letters in my hand feeling like lead weights. The entire tier was dead silent, every inmate watching, listening, waiting for the explosion. They were all in on it. In their eyes, I wasn't a CO anymore. I wasn't an authority figure. I was a joke, a pathetic, vulnerable target whose own family had turned on him for profit. Everything in my training, every primal instinct, screamed, react. Slam him against the bars. Wipe that smirk off his face. But I didn't. In that split second of white-hot rage, a strange clarity pierced through. I looked at Silas, and I didn't see an inmate who had just won. I saw a predictable opponent. He wanted me to get violent. That would get me fired, possibly charged with assault, and he'd win. He'd prove that he, the prisoner, had more power than the officer paid to guard him. So I did the one thing he never, in a million years, saw coming. I smiled back, a mirror image of his own cold grin. "Tell him yourself, Silas," I said, my voice perfectly calm, almost conversational. "You'll be seeing him sooner than you think." I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving a stunned, confused silence in my wake. The game had changed. They had made it deeply personal. Now I was going to make it brutally strategic. My revenge wouldn't be violent. It wouldn't be loud. It would be a quiet, systematic act of exposure that would tear down his entire reputation from the inside out, using the very system he had perfected. My plan wasn't about force. It was about weaponizing information. Silas's power came from his iron-fisted control of the block's complex social structure. He was the shot-caller, the king. To beat him, I had to cut him off at the knees, not by attacking him, but by destroying his credibility in the eyes of his subjects. First, I watched. I spent hours in the control booth, my eyes glued to the grainy camera feeds, studying inmate movements, noting every quiet conversation in the yard, every subtle handoff in the chow line. I started learning their nonverbal language, the flick of an eye, the subtle hand gesture that meant a deal was made, the shift in posture that signaled a debt was being called in. I meticulously mapped out the social network of C-Block. Who was in Silas's inner circle, his protective car? Who were the outsiders, the loners, the potential weak links? I started small, with surgical precision. Silas ran a lucrative side hustle smuggling extra food from the kitchen and selling it at a premium. I didn't bust the whole ring. That was too simple, too blunt. Instead, I staged a surprise shakedown on a single cell, a low-level inmate who owed Silas a favor. I confiscated a small amount of contraband food, just enough to be noticed. The raid looked random to everyone else, but the message to Silas was crystal clear: your system isn't foolproof. A single seed of doubt was planted among his followers. Next, I focused on his communication lines. Information was his lifeblood. He used kites, tiny, tightly folded, hidden notes, to pass messages, threats, and orders throughout the block. I started finding them, anticipating the drop-off points I'd observed on camera. But instead of just confiscating them and filing a report, I read them. I steamed them open, transcribed them, and resealed them, letting them continue to their destination. I was building my own intelligence file, learning about his debts to other gangs, his empty promises to his crew, his vicious threats to his enemies. I was painting a detailed picture of his fragile empire. My biggest move, my most significant gambit, involved Rico, the quiet kid who reminded me of a younger, more lost version of myself. I saw Silas's crew pressuring him, cornering him in the laundry room. They wanted him to keister a package of contraband, likely drugs, for them. To hide it in his rectum for a transfer. Rico was terrified. As a fish, a new and inexperienced inmate, he was an easy target, disposable. One evening, during a quiet moment on the tier, I walked up to his cell. He flinched, expecting another round of pressure, or worse. "I know what they want you to do, Rico," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper, making sure no one else could hear. "You don't have to do it." He just stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and suspicion. Snitching on Silas could get you killed, a fact he knew all too well. "I'm not asking you to be a snitch," I continued, holding his gaze. "I'm offering you a way out. There's a transfer opening to the minimum security facility upstate. Cleaner record, better programs, a real chance to get out and stay out. Your file is borderline. A good word from me, a recommendation based on your clean conduct record, could tip it in your favor." It was a massive gamble. I was bending the rules, using my position to influence a process, but it was a calculated risk. I was offering him a choice, not making a threat. My goal wasn't to turn him into an informant, to own him. It was to free him from Silas's grasp, to show that Silas's power was not absolute. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I just nodded and walked away. The next day, during count, he caught my eye from across the tier and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The deal was on. I immediately went to my supervisor and put in the transfer request with a glowing, detailed recommendation for Rico. At the same time, I started switching up my own routines, making myself a ghost. I became aggressively unpredictable. One day, I'd be a hard-ass, writing up inmates for the smallest infractions. The next, I'd let major stuff slide with a cryptic warning. I changed my patrol routes, the timing of my checks, the order in which I searched cells. The inmates, who live and die by the predictability of routine, got agitated. They couldn't get a read on me anymore. Their carefully constructed psychological profile of Officer America was now completely useless. My weirdest move, the one that confused my own partners and sparked a wave of rumors, was my new, obsessive interest in the prison library. I spent my breaks there, poring over dusty, ancient law books. I checked out books on criminal appeals, witness tampering statutes, and federal informant protocols. I made a conspicuous show of it, leaving them on my desk in the guard station where inmate cleaning crews could clearly see the titles. The rumors started to fly, just as I intended. What was the new Jack up to? Was he building a case? Against who? Was he working with the feds? I was creating an information vacuum and filling it with pure, uncut paranoia. Silas's crew got jumpy, looking over their shoulders. They had no idea what was coming, but they could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. The climax didn't come with a bang. It came, as it began, with a whisper. A week after Rico was quietly and successfully transferred to the minimum security facility, Silas was furious. He'd lost a mule, which was an inconvenience, but more importantly, he'd lost face. An officer had directly interfered with his business, and he had been powerless to stop it. The first major crack in his foundation of power appeared for all to see. The final move targeted the one thing that gives a man like Silas his entire reputation, his very identity within the prison walls, the unshakable belief that he is untouchable and, above all else, that he is not a snitch. Among the dozens of kites I'd intercepted and copied were several notes passed between Silas and a corrupt night shift CO I'll call Miller. The notes detailed their dirty deal in explicit terms. Miller would look the other way on contraband shipments coming into C-Block in exchange for regular information from Silas about rival gangs and their activities. Silas wasn't just a shot caller. He was a registered informant for a dirty guard. He was playing both sides, maintaining his street cred as an anti-authority figure while secretly feeding information to a CO to consolidate his own power and take out his competition. This was the ultimate sin in the inmate code, the one unforgivable transgression that could bring his entire empire crashing down. But just turning the notes over to the warden wasn't enough. That was too clean, too private. It had to be public. It had to be humiliating. It had to come from the inmates themselves. My chance came during a surprise, block-wide shakedown ordered by the warden to crack down on rising tensions I had deliberately created. As my partner and I were assigned to toss Silas's cell, I knew this was it. The moment was here. While my partner checked the bunk and the toilet for contraband, I went through Silas's personal items. Tucked inside a worn copy of The Art of War, I found the kites. But I didn't just find the real ones. I planted a new one, a masterpiece of forgery I had carefully created. I'd spent hours in the library, not just reading law books, but studying handwriting analysis. I practiced Silas's distinctive, slightly slanted script for days on end, using the same type of cheap pen from the commissary. The new kite was my masterpiece. It was a note, seemingly from Silas to Warden Thompson himself, written flawlessly in Silas's own hand. It was simple, direct, and devastating. It read, "Thompson, Miller is a security risk. He's dirty. My deal is with you and you alone. I'm holding up my end by keeping C-Block quiet. You need to hold up yours. Get rid of him." It was perfect in its treachery. It implied that Silas was the warden's personal informant, that he had a secret, direct line of communication that put him above everyone, even other staff. It made him look like he was selling out not just rival gangs, but even dirty cops, to the highest authority in the prison. He was the ultimate rat. I palmed the fabricated kite with the real ones I had collected. "Hey, boss," I called out to Warden Thompson, who was observing the shakedown from the central walkway, my voice loud enough for half the tier to hear clearly. "You might want to see this." I handed him the stack of notes, my fake one sitting right on top. The warden read it, and his eyes, which had been passive and observant, narrowed into sharp points of focus. He looked from the note to Silas, who had gone ghost white, the blood draining from his face. The warden was a smart man, a veteran of these games. He knew exactly what was happening. He probably knew, or at least strongly suspected, that the note was a forgery, but he also instantly saw the genius of the move. He saw the inescapable corner I'd just painted Silas into. The warden looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable. Was it anger? Or was it respect? In his eyes. Then he turned to two senior guards standing nearby. "Get Miller down here. And put Kane in the hole for administrative segregation. We need to have a talk." As they cuffed Silas, his composure finally shattered. He looked back at me over his shoulder, the trademark smirk gone, replaced by a look of pure, unfiltered hatred and complete disbelief. He'd been outplayed. Not by force, not by violence, but by a whisper, a single piece of paper. Word travels fast in a prison. Faster than fire in a dry forest. Silas, the untouchable shot caller, the enforcer of the inmate code, was a rat. His power, built over a decade, crumbled into dust in a matter of hours. His own crew, the men who had followed his every order, wanted nothing to do with him, fearing association with an informant. The social order of C Block was completely shattered. The silence that fell over the tier this time was no longer the silence of defiance. It was the silence of fear and uncertainty. The game was over. And I had won. Which brings me back to the warden's office, the polished desk, and the suffocating quiet. "So, you see, Warden," I finished, my voice steady. "That's what I did. I didn't lay a hand on him. I didn't threaten him. I just gave him a new reputation." Warden Thompson leaned back in his leather chair, which groaned under his weight, steepling his fingers under his chin. He was quiet for a long, long time, just studying me with an unnerving intensity. I had just confessed to fabricating evidence, orchestrating a massive psychological coup in his prison, and manipulating a dozen different situations to my own ends. I was fully expecting to be fired, to have my badge taken on the spot. "That note," he finally said, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the desk. "The one addressed to me. You wrote it. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact." "Yes, sir. I did." "You took an incredible, an almost insane risk, James," he said, shaking his head slowly. "You played a game that could have blown up in your face and taken this whole block with it. It could have started a riot." "With all due respect, sir," I countered, my voice firm but respectful, "Silas was already playing a game. A dangerous one. He was using information supplied by a corrupt vendor, a member of my own family, to undermine my authority and endanger my life outside these walls. He was corrupting one of your own officers. He lit the fuse long before I got there. All I did was redirect the explosion back to its source. I laid it all out for him. Everything. About my uncle's betrayal, about the deeply personal taunts, about the coordinated psychological war Silas had been waging for months. I explained that my seemingly random actions, the unpredictable routines, the library books, the single shakedown, were all calculated moves designed to destabilize his network and sow paranoia before I delivered the final blow. Removing Rico wasn't just about helping a kid, it was a strategic move to show Silas that his reach had limits, that his power was not absolute. Silas's power wasn't in his fists or his crew, I explained. It was in the perception that he was in complete control, that he was the ultimate arbiter of the inmate code. I just showed everyone the truth that was already there. His strength was a lie. He preached the inmate code while breaking its most sacred rule to serve himself. Then I played my final card, the one that connected the dots outside the prison walls. And about my uncle, I've already spoken with the State Procurement Office. I provided them with a detailed account of the situation. They're opening a full investigation into his contracts with the entire prison system. The rot started on the outside, sir. I just followed it to its source. The warden stared at me for another long moment, and then the corner of his mouth twitched, and he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a smile of grim, professional respect, the kind a veteran soldier gives a rookie who just did something crazy that somehow worked. "You know," he said, leaning forward on his elbows, "I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen officers try to solve problems with fists, with pepper spray, with tear gas. It's loud, it's messy, and it usually just makes more problems down the line. What you did, that was clean. It was surgical. You didn't just remove a problem inmate from the board. You removed his entire power structure without a single drop of blood being spilled. You understood that the real battlefield isn't the yard, it's the 6 inches of space between their ears. He leaned forward even further, his voice dropping. Miller has been fired and is under state investigation. Silas is being transferred to the Supermax facility upstate by the end of the week. He'll be in permanent solitary confinement. Down there, his reputation won't mean a thing. He'll have no one to manipulate. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the prison he commanded. The real twist, James, the part you still don't know, is that I've been fighting my own battles for months. Corruption in the supply chain, political pressure from above. That fake note you wrote? The one that painted Silas as my secret informant? It gave me the official leverage I needed to clean house, to go after people I've suspected for months but couldn't touch. You thought you were just getting personal revenge. You ended up doing my job for me. The Warden wasn't the enemy, the detached overlord I had imagined. He was just another player in a much bigger, more complicated game than I could have ever known. He turned back to me, his expression all business once again. Your methods were unorthodox and dangerous. And if you ever pull a stunt like that again without my direct knowledge, you're out of a job. But it was a masterstroke. You have a rare quality for this line of work. He extended his hand across the vast desk. Go take a few days off, James. You've earned it. Walking out of that office, the heavy door closing behind me, I felt a strange and unsettling mix of profound victory and pure, bone-deep exhaustion. I got my revenge. It wasn't about violence or brute force, it was about exposure and truth, twisted as it was. I took my enemy apart with information, meticulously dismantling his reputation piece by piece until there was nothing left. But in the quiet aftermath of the war, I thought about the cost. To win, I had to walk a fragile, razor-thin line between justice and obsession, and I saw how easily that line gets blurred in a place like this. I used the enemy's tactics against him, and in doing so, I had to look at a part of myself that understood those dark, manipulative tactics a little too well. I realized that true justice isn't always about punishment from the state. Sometimes, it's about the desperate, personal act of taking back your own peace of mind, even if the scars from the battle are still there. The most significant battles inside prison walls are the ones that are mostly invisible, fought in whispers and glances, but they are the most brutal of all. And sometimes, the only way to win is to burn the old rulebook and change the very nature of the game. If this story left you speechless, smash that like button. Let me know in the comments, was justice truly served, or did I go too far in my methods? And make sure you subscribe, you don't want to miss the stories I have coming up.